I want to tell you about Texas radio and the Big B. It was a warm summer night with our song playing on the radio.
Welcome to today's edition of I Remember Radio. We have two California sports broadcasting legends, one from the South and one from the North. We have Monte Moore from the Oakland Athletics, and he'll be talking with friend Ross Porter from the Los Angeles Dodgers. Ross, Monte, glad to have you here.
Thank you very much, Mike. Good to be along, and my good friend Monte there makes me feel good.
Well, I feel honored to be on this, whatever's doing. As I say, I'm not really hip on this high-tech stuff, so lead me through this.
Today, in honor of you, Monte, I'm wearing my 1938 University of Oklahoma baseball jersey. Now, you were not on that team. I want to say that first of all.
That's right. I was 8 years old at that time.
That's right. Well, we were both from small towns. I was from Shawnee, population 24,000, and Monte was from Hollis. How many people were in Hollis at the time?
Well, there were 2,500 people there at that time, and now there may be 500 from what I hear.
Who was the most famous athlete to come out of Hollis?
Well, I would say Darrell Royal, probably.
Yeah.
Darrell was a great player in high school, and then went away to the University of Oklahoma, was a great football player there for Bud Wilkinson. And then he went off to Texas, to the despair of all of us Sooners. He was so good, they even named the stadium in Texas after him.
That's right.
To let you know, there's also a stadium in Hollis, Oklahoma, named Darrell Royal Stadium.
Well, you told me one time, and any football fan knows that over the years, Oklahoma has been one of the best programs in the country. You told me one time that there were so many guys from Hollis on that starting team of theirs. How many were there?
There were 5 players on the Oklahoma starting lineup in the game, and the 5 players were Leon Heath was a fullback, Darrell Royal was a quarterback. We had a lineman by the name of Bill Coven. He was a center that day. J.W. Cole was a tackle, and Leon Manley was the other tackle. Wow. And those 5 guys started, and Bud Wilkinson thought so much about Hollis that he called that Saturday game Hollis, Oklahoma Day.
Well, that's great. Well, growing up, I think neither one of us had a chance to listen to a lot of Major League Baseball because in Oklahoma, there just wasn't that available to you. I remember nights when I got my dad to put me in the car and drive me out to a spot where I could hear the Cardinals game on a Tulsa station, but there was so much static that was difficult. Now, tell me about the first baseball broadcast that you remember.
Ross, when I was a senior in high school, I came down with rheumatic fever. So that meant I couldn't play any more sports. While I was in high school, I was bedridden. So while I was in bed for 6 weeks, I listened every day to the game of the week, game of the day.
Yeah.
Al Wolfer and Art Gleason, I believe, was the other one. And eventually along came Dizzy Dean. But
well, Gary Doggett, who was my colleague for 11 years, was on that, Monte, and so was the outstanding Lindsey Nelson.
Yeah, that's what I listened to, and I got to thinking that would be a pretty good thing to do for a career. So I graduated, and my dad, who was a barber in Hollis, Ross, this is a true story. My dad knew what I wanted to do, so he bought a public address system. Well, one speaker and one microphone. And we had softball games out at the fairgrounds in Hollis. And I was the PA announcer on those softball games.
Oh, wow.
And our speaker was loud enough. We didn't have a radio station, but everybody in town could almost hear. the PA announcer of those softball games. So that's how I got started doing PA announcements on the softball games at Hollis, Oklahoma.
But I think you told me one time that maybe the first World Series broadcast you ever heard was in 1947 when the Yankees played the Dodgers, and the guy who was announcing the games became a real idol of yours. Who was that man?
Well, Mel Allen was one.
That's right.
Yeah. And one of the great thrills I ever had, Ross, was when Mel had retired from the Yankees, still in New York City, and my broadcast partner was not able to be there that when we were in there. The A's were in New York. So I said, you know what would be fun is try to find Mel Allen. So I called the Yankees. They let me know how to get hold of him. Mel came in to the Yankee Stadium broadcast booth with me, and we shared a broadcast back to Oakland out of New York City.
Wow, that was great. Well, did you ever do recreation of baseball?
Oh my goodness, yes. You know, I started off when I got out of the Army for a couple of years. My first job was in Lawton, Oklahoma, as a broadcaster. Actually, before I went into the service, when I graduated from OU, I don't mind telling you, I was a pretty good catcher on fast pitch softball teams.
Yeah.
And when I was doing a Sooner baseball broadcast on KUVY.
Oh, I was on there too, KUVY, the student station at OU.
That's right. It was a wireless station. And it went into the dormitories. Well, I was doing a Sooner baseball game, and when the game was over, there was a guy had walked in and sat down right in front. We had a little open broadcast space, just a table there. You know what that was like?
Yeah.
It's a Sooner baseball field. This guy sat down. Well, when I was through, I stood up, and this guy said, "Hey, Monte." I said, "Yeah, why do I know you?" And he said, "My name is Leo Morris, and remember in the fast pitch World Series of softball, you were a catcher, and you got 2 hits off of me in that World Series for softball."
Yeah.
He said, "I know you're graduating, and I'd like to let you know that Duncan, Oklahoma is put together a fast pitch softball team, and they have hired me as the manager of KRHD in Duncan, Oklahoma. It's a little 250-watt radio station. And Leo Morris was the guy who was there, and he was the pitcher. And he said, Monte, I don't know anything about radio, but they've offered me the job as manager of the radio station if I would come there and we'd organize a fast pitch softball team that would qualify for the World Tournament. He said, I need a catcher, and I remember you in the World Tournament. You got a couple of hits off of me and threw a runner out. He said, would you be interested in coming to Duncan, Oklahoma and being a broadcaster? I said, I got to go in the Army August 28th. He said, well, the World Tournament's going to be in Clearwater, Florida, and on August the 15th. You'll just get out in time to go into the service. So that's how I got my first broadcast job.
Let me interject one thing here, Monte. It just so happens that my wife, Lynn, for whom I've been married almost 60 years, was a graduate of Duncan High School.
Oh, my goodness. KRHD, Duncan, Oklahoma. They had a big Halliburton oil field there, but they had a Chevrolet company called Thorne Chevrolet. And they gave me an older model car and a job on KRHD. We didn't do any sports there. I was a morning disc jockey, but I was a catcher for the pitcher. He needed a catcher, and I got my first job in radio because I could catch softball fast pitch pitchers.
Well, I want to go back to your days at KUVY, where we, as students, got a chance to do some sports, and you and I both got to do some play-by-play of football, basketball, even baseball. But you did something that I thought was so original, because we all thought, you know, who is listening to our broadcast from the dormitories? We're getting experience. But You had a great idea, and you went out with what, pamphlets?
Pamphlets. I got the journalism major in that Worcester house, was the dormitory I lived in, and he made up some circulars, and we passed them out to the dormitories.
Did you ever have anybody say to you, Monty, I heard you on the broadcast?
Not on KUVY, but
That's what I mean.
yeah, no. Mike Treps. You remember Mike Treps?
Mike was a good friend of both of ours.
Yeah.
Mike was at OU with us along the way, and he then got out of OU. He went to Shawnee, my hometown, got on the radio station, and even, Monty, you can't believe this, Mike Treps got a room in my grandmother's home in Shawnee.
Wow. Well, by the time he got out of school, university, he was younger than you and I are, but he was looking for a job, and I, by that time, had gotten out of the Army and everything, and I was in Porterville. And I called Mike up and said, Mike, do you have a job? He said, no, I don't. I said, we'll hire you to come to work in Porterville. And same station your son came to work for us on.
Yeah.
But Mike came to Porterville and worked just a little while, but then he got a job in Pittsburgh, Kansas on a radio station.
Yeah.
And from then he ended up at WKY TV in Oklahoma City.
Yes, he did. Where I worked before that. And here's another oddity. When we left Edmond, Oklahoma to come to California, who bought our home in Edmond? Mike Treps.
Oh, my word. That's something. Well, Mike ended up being the publicity director for the University of Oklahoma.
Yes, he did.
And received national accolades from that association for the job he did.
And he was on their football broadcast too, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. All right, now we get you out of Hollis High School, and here you go to the University of Oklahoma to study radio broadcasting.
Right.
You also, as I understand it, thought you might make the OU basketball team. Is that right?
Right.
Were you a good basketball player at Hollis High School?
I wasn't too bad, and in those days, nobody shot the one-handed shot.
Yeah.
Ted Owens, who later became the coach at the University of Kansas.
Oh, wonderful man.
After playing at Oklahoma University, Ted was, of course, at Hollis, Oklahoma, when I was. But Ted Owens ended up at the University of Kansas as head coach.
Yeah.
But I was going to tell you about. So when I went to OU as a freshman, they had tryouts, and the freshmen could not be eligible to play in any games.
Right.
So I went for the tryouts, and there had all kinds of people there. And they called me in after the one practice, and Bruce Drake was the head coach there, Shockey Needy, the freshman coach. And they said, well, we like the way you shoot your two-hand shot, but you don't have a lot of the other skills. So maybe it'd be better if you came to practice every day, brought a tape recorder, and you go up in the top row of the bleachers here at Owen Fieldhouse, and you broadcast what we're practicing down there, and you will become a broadcaster. So I went up there, and I went, I don't know how many days, Ross, and I would practice doing a basketball game while I was up there. Those guys were down there.
Yeah, so, he hurt your feelings, but you got him in the end, didn't you? Because tell us why.
Well, I surely did. He kicked me off the basketball team, and I married his daughter.
Oh, wonderful! And you had 3 wonderful kids, and that was a great story. But I just marvel over the fact that you did that. And of course, Bruce was such an outstanding coach. In fact, he was on the United States Olympic coaching staff.
1956. He and Gerald Tucker.
Yeah. And
that was the Bill Russell team.
Oh, yeah, right. And Henry Iba, I think, also had some teams in there, too, that went to the Olympics. But,
later, Iba came along a little bit later.
Yeah.
But Bruce and Gerald Tucker was the head coach of the Olympic team in 56, and he had been Bruce Drake's center at the University of Oklahoma when he went to college.
You mentioned Leo Morris, who had such a lot to do with your career and gave you some chances. Duncan, and then on to Lawton. And I think it was when you were in Lawton that you and I got together for the first time, because we were both broadcasting the games of a Class D, that's D as in dog,
Right.
The Sooner State League teams. You were at Lawton, and I was at Shawnee. I think I was 15 years old at the time, but you and I clicked immediately. And do you remember the night that I did one inning on the Lawton station and you did one inning on the Shawnee station? We just swapped spots in the broadcast booth.
Right. Yeah. In those days, Ross, we recreated the road games. None of us broadcasters in the Sooner State League traveled.
That's right.
We did wire recreation, and I'll never forget in the Sooner State League. I was doing a game one night in the studio of KSWO in Lawton, Oklahoma, where I was working at that time, and all of a sudden the Western Union guy came in, and instead of handing me the script of the description of a game the Lawton team was playing in Ponca City. And so anyway, it said, something happened here. We're not getting the message. So I said, well, what was it? So I ad-libbed there for a while, and finally the Western Union guy came in and said, you know why we're not getting any message out of Ponca City? I said, no, a tornado just hit the ball club and blew the center field fence down and the press box.
Everybody, I think, Monty, who ever did recreated baseball has a story to tell. I got a couple of examples to share with you and everybody else. And it's so interesting. For people who don't know what we're talking about, you would have, let's say, a Western Union operator in your radio station to be able to give you the information. Now, what you had to do was that you had to start your broadcast 15 minutes or so after the actual game started, because you didn't want to catch up with the actual game because you wouldn't know what to do. But here came the ticker tape, and across the ticker tape would come Jones at bat, B1, that meant ball one.
Ball one.
Strike one. Ground ball to short, Jones throws him out at first. So you are recreating it without seeing it and not knowing it. You probably had sound effects, didn't you, Monty?
We had one big tape, not a tape. We had a disc. It was the crowd noise from Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
And it was a 40,000 people in Yankee Stadium, but on our tape, on our disc,
yeah,
we probably had 300 people in the ballpark.
Yeah, right. Well, here are my two stories. Shawnee had a game one night in Paris, Texas. They were in the Sooner State League at the time. It's not me. I'm not there yet. But the guy starts out doing the broadcast, and as you said, he gets right along, and suddenly it stops. There's nothing coming across the ticker tape. And he has come up to within about 3 batters of the actual game, and he is in trouble. He came up, Monty, with one of the best ideas I ever heard in my life. He suddenly said, oh, my gosh, look at the lightning out there behind the fence in left field. I'm smelling rain. Oh, it's starting to rain here it's so heavy. They're now going to get the tarp out there and cover the field. And so we'll take a break here now. And when the rain stops, we will be back to continue the broadcast. I thought that was brilliant. Now, the game is over. And my friend in Shawnee, who was a sports editor, Roy Angel, called Paris to get the box score of the game from the Paris newspaper sports editor. And Roy said to him, gosh, you must have had quite a rain down there. And the guy said, what are you talking about? It hadn't rained here in 8 months. And the other famous story about recreation in baseball, of all people, was the one that Ronald Reagan told. Now, Ronald Reagan, when he got out of school at Eureka College, looked around for some sportscasting jobs, and he wound up at WHO in Des Moines, which was a powerful station. As you know, Monty, was 50,000 watts, and you could get it all over the country. And WHO did the Chicago Cubs games. But as you pointed out, they didn't go on the road with them from Des Moines. He sat in the studio in Des Moines and did the Cubs games on recreation. One day, same thing happened to him. Game's moving along. Suddenly, the machine breaks. He's got nothing. And he then was within 1 batter of the actual game. And he did something that is probably most creative of all. He had the batter at the plate, foul off 16 consecutive. and he bought enough time that finally they got the machine working and he went back to work. But those were the great days of recreation. And I guess it was started, Bonnie, by a guy named Gordon McClendon.
Gordon McClendon did it on KLFIF, Dallas, Texas, the Liberty Network.
That's right. Yep. And so those were great days. Then you got a chance. At one time, you were doing, I think, a high school basketball game somewhere in Oklahoma, and a fella from a radio station in Hutchinson, Kansas, was driving through Oklahoma. And tell us what happened then.
Well, it was a day game, and it was the county basketball tournament near Cache, just outside of Lawton. And I was at KSWO in Lawton, and we were over there doing that ball game. Well, I got back to the radio station, and there was a telephone message there, call this number. And I didn't recognize the number. And it turns out it was a man by the name of Vern Miner. And he was the owner of KWHK in Hutchinson, Kansas. And he said, when I called him back, he said, I was driving through Oklahoma and I heard this broadcast of a high school game and said, we don't have a sportscaster up there now. Our guy left. We're looking for one. And if you'd be interested, I like the way you broadcast that basketball game. He said, we have the National Junior College Tournament in Hutchinson, Kansas every year. And that's what they did. They brought in 16 teams from around the nation into that town in Hutchinson. And just to make it funny here, we did 3 games in the afternoon and 3 games at night. I would do the first and third game, and I had another guy do the middle game. I did 4 games a day on KWHK at the National Junior College Tournament.
Wow. And that guy, I think, didn't he call you from a gas station?
Yeah, he was driving through Oklahoma on the way back to Hutchinson. And, I never had even heard of Hutchinson, but I said, I always wanted, if you're at Oklahoma, in those days, the ultimate was to get to Kansas City some way. Because that's where
sure. And you eventually got there, but first you had 2 years in Hutchinson, and then you became the director of the Kansas University Sports Network, and they covered all of the Jayhawk sports. I think you said there are like 25 stations on your network. And with the great basketball program that KU has had over the years, Monty, I would think that they had tremendous audiences for those broadcasts. And you told me one time, it's probably the biggest break you ever had in your career.
Yeah, and Ross, you know how things work. I got that job because on a Sunday afternoon, our KWHK would go to Wichita, Kansas, and broadcast the games of the Wichita Vickers.
Yeah, sure.
NIBL.
Yeah.
And in those days, rather than AAU, they had the NIBL. And boy, they had a lot of great players. Bob Curlin and all those guys were on those teams. Well, our station, we went to Wichita every Sunday afternoon and broadcast the games. The man who was the director of the KU Sports Network was driving up the Kansas Freeway from Oklahoma back to Kansas City, back to Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
He called me on Monday at the radio station in Hutchinson, and he said, hey, I heard your broadcast of the Wichita Vickers on my way up the highway yesterday. Would you be interested? Our broadcaster, Merle Harmon, who was of the KU Sports Network, moving to Kansas City. And he said, we don't have anybody to do the KU Sports Network. Would you be interested? I like your broadcast. So I said, well, when can I come? He said, we'd like to talk to you any day. So my wife and I got in the car, drove to Lawrence, Kansas on Tuesday, accepted that job without even asking how much or anything, to do KU Sports.
Yeah, and their greatest player was Wilt Chamberlain.
Wilt Chamberlain.
Everybody knows about, a 7-footer who had a tremendous career. And didn't you and Wilt have some sort of a radio show at that time in KU?
Well, part of my job at the University of Kansas was teaching a class in broadcasting, radio broadcasting, and TV broadcasting. Guess who? One of my favorite students, Wilt Chamberlain. So I said, one day Wilt came in and he said, man, I've got a lot of music and I'd like to be a disc jockey somehow. I said, well, let's talk about it. So I went to the director of the network and I said, what do you think about if Wilt Chamberlain, every week I do the interviews on Monday from Saturday's games to all the network stations. And I said, how about if Wilt did like a 1-hour disc jockey show that we send out on tape every week on Monday, because he's got all these records. Wilt had a stack of little 45 records.
Yeah.
And he had the equipment with it. And I never asked him how he afforded all that, but he but it was RKU. But he ended up doing a show, and I said, what are we going to call it? And he said, Flipper with Dipper. So, because they were calling him the Big Dipper at times. So,
Yeah.
so he did a disc jockey show every week. He was at KU after the OU game, the KU game on whatever night it was.
Do you remember, I was at OU at that time, and somehow or the other, you invited me to come up to Lawrence. It was 1958, and they were having the NCAA West Regionals there. And you said to me, hey, if you come up here, bring your tape recorder. I'll get you an interview with Wilt Chamberlain. So my good friend John Brooks, who later became a very good sportscaster in Oklahoma, he and I got on the train in Norman, came to Lawrence, got off, got over to the campus, to your office, and suddenly, here comes this big guy, probably driving a convertible at the time, 7 feet tall, got out of the car and came in, and you introduced him to me. And I always jokingly say this, Monty, I pulled my tape recorder out. I was so awestruck by being here with Wilt Chamberlain. I think I was 19 years old. And I think that the interview, if you had heard it later, would have gone like this. Wilt, it's a real problem of not being there, but I'm sure glad to be able to talk to you.
Yeah, Wilt became good friends. I was the first person he told the day he decided to not come back to KU for his junior year. He only played the one sophomore year, was not eligible as a freshman in those days. So he played the 1 year, and he the day he decided to not come back to KU, he came by my office at the radio station there at KU, and he said, hey, look out the window and look what I got today. And I said, what was that? It was a brand new Oldsmobile convertible.
Oh, wow.
I said, Wilt, you're not supposed to have something like that. He said, I'm quitting school. I'm joining the Globetrotter.
Yeah. How did he have leg room to get into that car? That's what I got to know.
He took the top off. Yeah.
One more thing that always stuck with me. In that tournament, they had in those days, they had even a third place game. So if you lost, you were in the 4 teams, but if you lost, you played the loser of the other game the next night. And that year, Cincinnati played, I think, Arkansas, wasn't it? Anyway, they played. Oscar Robertson was the star of the Cincinnati team, and you know what a great career he had. I'll never forget that night. I sat there and watched that. Oscar Robertson scored 56 points in that ball game, and of course had a tremendous career after that. But we're talking about University of Cincinnati, Monty. You probably know this. There's a guy who went to Cincinnati on a basketball scholarship, a fellow named Sandy Koufax.
Oh my! I didn't know that about Sandy.
Yeah, he was on the freshman team. He went out as a walk-on, and they put him on there, and he eventually got on the varsity baseball team, and that's when the Dodgers came out and outbid some other major league teams and signed him, and they gave him a $4,000 a year salary, and I think a bonus of like $14,000, and of course he wound up one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history. But I thought that was interesting. So you have about 3 years with the Kansas University Network, and then you made the move that you'd always look forward to making. You got a job in Kansas City.
Yeah, I got WDAF was broadcasting the A's games, and they were doing a lot of Big 8 in those days, Big 7 games, basketball, football, and I had been doing the Kansas games on the regional network. So Merle Harmon had left the KU network to go to WDAF in Kansas City. Well, then he went from WDAF, then he went to doing the A's games, the Kansas City A's.
Yeah.
Well, when I went to, I took the job, I was offered the job at WDAF to come in and do Big A Sports and do a nightly broadcast on television and one on radio. And also the Kansas City Steers of the old American Basketball League had formed a team in Kansas City. And they had some great players on it. And Jack McMahon was the coach.
Yeah.
Well, we got to the Steers got to the finals against Ohio. They had all the Ohio State guys. And anyway, we did a best of 7 and a best of 5 games for the championship of the American Basketball League.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie Finley had just bought the Kansas City A's a few days before our finals on the ABL. And he and Park Carroll, who was the general manager of the Kansas City A's at the time, went out for dinner. Charlie was in town in Kansas City, and they went out for dinner. And on the way back, Park Carroll had just turned in the final broadcast of the Kansas City Steers, and that came from Ohio. Well, what happened was Charlie Finley was in that car with Park Carroll. And the next day, Charlie decided to fire Eddie Lopez.
Yeah.
And Eddie didn't even know it. He was out fishing. He didn't know he'd been fired, and Charlie had a press conference. Well, I was a sportscaster at WDAF besides doing the basketball games. I was doing my daily shows. So we went into the old Mulebach Hotel.
Yeah.
Finley had called an 11 o'clock press conference. So I said, well, as sports director, I will cover that. So went through the lobby and got on the elevator, and here's Park Carroll, and Charlie Finley was standing right next to him.
Mm.
And Park Carroll said, Charlie, you know, you said you liked that guy broadcasting last night. Here he is right here. His name is Moore. And Finley said, hey, kid, how'd you like to do my A's broadcast? He didn't say, have you ever done a baseball game or anything? He said, yeah, I'd like to do my game. I said, well, you've got broadcasters. He said, Harmon's gone. I'm getting rid of Merle Harmon. I don't like Merle. So at any rate, and it was spring training because our basketball season was over. So the team was in Florida in spring training. They were coming back to open the season on Tuesday. That was a Friday. I had to go to Cleveland on Saturday to do the final game of the team, and they were coached by Bill Sharman, Cleveland was. But anyway, while I was in the hotel in Cleveland, I got his phone call from Charlie Finley before that game that day. He said, hey, kid, you still want that job doing the A's? I said, yes, sir. I really would like that, but I'm doing a basketball game. He said, on WDAF. And he said, don't worry about that. I've got a contract with KCMO, and I already got your deal worked out for KCMO. And this was Saturday night, and we're getting back into Kansas City on Sunday afternoon.
Well, now let me interrupt you just a minute. So he said you can still do the football on WDAF, but you can also broadcast our A's games over KCMO, right? That was a pretty good deal.
Well, what the deal was, when Charlie offered me that job, I said, I've got a contract with KCM with WDAF. He said, I'll take care of that. Don't worry about it. So by the time I got back from Cleveland in that day, the next Sunday, he said, you got the job. So Monday I started. I hadn't seen any of the spring training games. I didn't know any of the players. And so I started off. That was my major league start right there. Ross?
For people who don't know about Charles O. Finley,
yeah,
he was a character. He made a ton of money in the insurance business. I think medical insurance was the thing that really got him going. And he got the money, and he made these purchases of teams. And then later, and you can tell everybody about this, he was the guy who came up with all these ideas. One of them was, let's have an orange baseball. And the player said, we can't see the spin, right? Yeah.
That was one of the reasons. I don't know what else, but they didn't like the idea of having that. We used it in a spring training game.
Did you?
I've got one. I've got one somewhere in my stack of keepsakes from the A's. I've got an orange baseball.
We have one too, Monty. It's in storage somewhere. But yeah, that was part of it. And isn't it true that he decided he'd make a mule his mascot?
Yes, he somehow he is infatuated with mules. So he found this big, it was a big mule, kind of a red colored mule, and he named him Charlie O the Mule. And Ross, he had that mule out there before every game, and he would parade that mule around, and a lot of times he'd have an A's player riding that mule.
Right.
Well, one time the Boston Red Sox were in Kansas City for a series, and they had Jimmy Pearsall.
Yeah.
So before the game, our player came riding that mule around in front of the visitors' dugout. Pearsall was sitting in the corner, and he had a baseball, and he drew back and threw that baseball and hit that mule right in the butt. Took our player, Bobby Del Greco, off onto the ground.
And didn't they say also that Charlie O would even have the mule go indoors? I mean, he might go to a press conference, or he might go to a cocktail party, or any place, and there he was.
He had that mule and a wagon. He had an air-conditioned wagon that he pulled that mule around. We'd go to towns where the A's were playing. And one of the times I'll never forget, we went into New York City, and Charlie would have that mule go out with the wagon, and he would give away baseball to the Little League practice fields.
Sure.
But then we were staying in the Summit Hotel there in New York City. The team was, and lo and behold, Finley got that hotel to let him bring that mule into the lobby. and he had a fence built around in the lobby for that mule, and put hay in the ground on the lobby floor and everything.
What about the mechanical rabbit that he put in? What was that?
He had that put up right next to home plate, and they actually used it in a game or two. What happened is the umpire, instead of having balls like this, that rabbit came out of the ground with a basket head full of baseballs.
Yeah.
The umpire would push his air horn, and that basket would come up out of the ground, and the umpire would get the baseball that way.
Oh.
It got hung up one day, and they had to take time out of the game because the thing got hung up and wouldn't go back down.
And he also had something about mustaches. Didn't he give players extra money if they wear a mustache?
That was in Oakland.
Yeah.
That was in Oakland, yeah. He had everybody, he said he'll give us $300 if you wear a mustache. Well, Fingers already had one, of course, and one or two other guys, but Finley thought it'd be good. So on the airplane trip that we had out of Oakland to somewhere, I forget where, Finley said, I'll give everybody $300 if you'll grow a mustache. And so everybody grew a mustache. He made me wear one.
No.
Yep.
Did you get money?
No, I never got the $300.
That's right. You said that, you always respected Charles Finley because he gave you your first major league broadcasting opportunity. But you've also said that he could be very difficult to work for.
Well, there's no doubt about that. Everybody who ever worked for him, not just the broadcasters, but actually he bothered us less than he did anybody else, just about. But he had his own way, and it was not, he wasn't very kind to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Well,
he had a lot of good ideas,
yeah.
But he was tough on managers. Boy, I don't know how many hours I spent with managers on the road, just out of the hotel somewhere sitting, talking, saying, how am I going to get along with this stuff?
Yeah.
All this kind of thing. He was...
He liked broadcasters, though, more than I think he liked sports writers.
That's true. Some of them.
Yeah.
Some of them.
But didn't you say he would do things where he would give you some sort of a tip and before the media got the whole thing like a trade.
Well, Ross, during a ball game, a lot of times, I don't know how many times, he would call our broadcast booth. He always had a radio line into our booth. He would call our booth and say, I just traded so-and-so. The game is still going on, and the guy who's traded is out in the bullpen. Nothing about it. So we put it on the air.
Yeah.
And the newspaper guys hated it because they didn't have the story.
Yeah.
And they got mad at me for breaking the story. I said, hey, Charlie told me to we go ahead and announce it.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of times the players didn't know it themselves until they heard it on the radio.
Yeah.
Not in the bullpen, they always had a radio.
But I remember that some of them used to call you a shill for Charlie Finley, which was not true at all. Did he ever, I don't know, did he ever ask you to do anything or just direct you to make a move?
Ross, the only thing he really demanded out of us is that we publicize things that he did, like trades. He would have giveaways at the ballpark. And I'll tell you one of the I don't think you'd call it a funny story, but we were on the road one time with the A's and in Chicago. And when we get into Chicago, Charlie would usually have something in his office that he'd want to show us broadcasters that he wanted us to show on TV that night. So he called us over there, and my broadcast partner and I went over to his office in Chicago there, and he said, now these are the batting helmets. We're going to give away these batting helmets, A's batting helmets. When you guys get back off the road trip on the first Sunday there, we're giving away these helmets. So you show them tonight on TV. So I took this helmet out, and we showed it. And so I got on the air, and I said something. I said, but now, kids, remember this. This is not a protective helmet. You can't wear this instead of the helmets that you wear when you're batting because it's not all that safe, but it's fun. Boy, when I got back into Oakland, my phone was ringing, and Finley yelled at me and cussed me for saying that. He said, you're going to knock all those kids out. None of them will want to come to the ball game because you said those helmets aren't safe. So anyway, we go from Chicago into Detroit for our next series. We get into Detroit, and it's a Saturday afternoon game. And Saturday night, Charlie decided to take the press corps out to dinner in Detroit. So we had the broadcasters and the writers all go to this restaurant. I noticed when Charlie came in, we were standing in line to go back into the restaurant. He had his hand in a cast. And I said, Charlie, how did you break your hand? And he said, and he goes through his cussing. He said, I got so blankety blank mad at you, I hit my fist on the disc. I broke my fist because you didn't advertise those damn helmets.
Oh, that's great. Well, now, when you started, it was the Kansas City Athletics, and I'll tell you, they had some bad teams there for you. Didn't you lose over 100 games a couple of years in a row in the mid-'60s?
Oh, yeah, it was definitely. But in those days, we were losing those games. But Charlie, boy, to his credit, he went out and signed some bonus kids. And he went out personally and signed Catfish Hunter, John Blue Moon Odom, Jim Nash, Reggie Jackson, Rick Monday, Sal Bando. Charlie personally signed those guys.
Wow.
That's how Catfish Hunter got his nickname. But Charlie went to North Carolina to sign his high school kid, Jim Hunter.
Oh,
and
wow.
when he got into the house, Charlie said, well, I want to talk to Jim. Where's Jim? And his mother said, he's down on the creek. He goes down and fishes every day about this time. So Finley said, where is it? I'll go down there. So Finley went down there for catfish. He hadn't had that name yet.
No.
Jim Hunter was fishing catfish. So Charlie signed him that day. He had the catfish had shot and accidentally part of his foot off.
Oh, wow.
So Charlie said, I'll take you to the Mayo Clinic and we'll get that foot set up. So before Catfish Hunter ever pitched a game, Charlie Finley had taken him to Mayo Clinic and got that foot fixed to where he became a Hall of Famer eventually.
Well, I remember in your years in Kansas City, you one time told me on the phone, said, why don't you apply to join me in the A's booth? If you just send me a tape, I'll get it in the right hands. And I always appreciated that, Monty. I sent you the tape. You later told me you really didn't have a chance because Charlie had an old-time friend named Red Rush that he gave the job to. But I always wanted to thank you for that.
Yeah, I that was not one of my better experiences. Red was from Chicago, and of course, that's where Charlie was from. And I never had a whole lot of respect for Red. He had some abilities, but he really wasn't into anything except horse racing.
Well, finally, the team moves from Kansas City to Oakland, 1968. Had a pretty good year. The next year, I think they were second. And then, wow, 3 straight world championships from 1972 to 1974. They beat the Reds, they beat the Mets, they beat the Dodgers. And in each one of those years, you got to broadcast the World Series on NBC radio with our mutual friend, Kurt Gowdy. Would you say that was the biggest thrill of your career, Monty?
Well, you know what? Oh, yeah, without a doubt, because I got to do 3 World Series. It was on television. Well, we did. I did with Kurt Gowdy and Tony Kubek and Joe Gargiulo doing the pregame shows. That was for television and on the home games. When we were on the road, I did the radio games, NBC radio with Jim Simpson.
Oh, yeah.
So, without a doubt, doing 3 World Series in a row, boy, it had to be the epitome of what we were doing for broadcasting.
Was it true that the Oakland players didn't all get along, but they took the field and they won?
Yeah, well, they had some differences. They had, for instance, before the 74 World Series, we were with the Dodgers in Los Angeles there, and before the first game in Los Angeles, I was sitting out in the dugout. You know, all the players, broadcasters and everybody sit around the dugouts, before a game, talking to managers and so forth. Well, I was out in the dugout with some of the scribes and so forth, and here came that clubhouse guy, the visiting clubhouse guy, who was with the A's team in the dressing room, running into the dugout. And he said, God, those guys out there, they were having a fight in the dressing room. I mean, it's a brawl. And he was describing that whole thing. And that was the fight where John Odom got into a fight with, who was it?
Blue Moon, is that his name? Blue Moon Odom.
No, Odom wasn't in that one. He was in another one. But anyway, they got into this fight. And Ray Fosse, who later became my broadcast partner with the A's, Ray broke up the fight between those two guys. And in so doing, he broke a bone in his neck. Ray Fosse was pretty well through as a player at that point.
Was Ray Fosse the one that Pete Rose banged into the home plate?
Yes, absolutely.
In the All-Star game?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's always been said of you, you are enthusiastic, you are knowledgeable, you enjoy baseball, and you're steady in what you do, which is a great compliment. And you do your homework, which I always thought was the important thing to do, Monty, as you got ready for a game. And I always said, you better not believe that the people out there don't know what's going on. There might be some guy in Riverside listening to you who knows more than you know.
Yeah. When I first started broadcasting in 62, they didn't have the computers and that kind of stuff. And I kept a daily book, a statistic book on each player And I had this thing, and the managers would look at my book
Yeah.
today because the league didn't put out anything. They did have the daily batting averages and so forth like that. But I kept statistics myself
Yeah.
all the years that I broadcast up until when I went back to do some more television. When I went back later, they had everything.
You said, I'm definitely pro Kansas City, but I'm trying to be as fair as I can be. And you had an interesting point one time that you made. You said you thought that as far as the players were concerned, it didn't bother them as much if you talked about their mistakes when you thought they were wrong, and the players didn't want you to alibi for them. You think that was true?
Well, pretty much so, Ross. And I established a thing in my own mind pretty early on in my broadcasting. There's always, and I'm sure you heard it too with the Dodgers, some of the players' wives who were listening at home while you're on the road, they would always hear you say something that might be like, oh, Bando made an error, he should have gone to his left or something like that. Well, I used to say, and the wives would then pass the word along to their husbands that I said something, and they'd blow it up a little bit.
That's right.
And the player would say something to me, and I said, hey, look, until you thank me for all the good things I say about you during the broadcast, don't spend my time saying one little picky thing like that that was against you. So,
you did not mind knowing that the fans out there realized that you wanted the A's to win, but you were never guilty of saying on the air during a game, come on, Campy, I want you to get a base hit here, No,
I couldn't do it. I didn't go that far, but there was nobody listening to our broadcast who didn't know I was happy when we won.
Sure, that's right.
Yeah. One thing that, we were talking about things that I was proud of being able to do the World Series. From the time I started broadcasting the big leagues in 1962 until I quit after the 78 season, I broadcast 3,002 consecutive games.
Wow.
I never missed a game in over 3,000.
Wow. That's terrific. These days, you'll hear some people say when there's a home run hit in baseball, oh, he just hit a dinger.
Yeah.
And were you the first announcer to use that term? And how did that come about?
Darryl Knowles was one of our relief pitchers and a good one in the teams of the 70s. And one day I was interviewing him. He did a job one day. And so the next day I interviewed him before the game on our warm-up show. And I said, well, it was a great job yesterday. And he said, well, it was all good except I gave up that dinger to somebody. And I said, dinger? He said, yeah, home run. So as a result of that, I started calling home runs dingers once in a while. I didn't do all of them. But we're on the road one time, and we were going to come back home and play the Kansas City Royals, a big series. And we had a doubleheader scheduled on a Monday night. Well, Finley, in order to get more fans in the stands, would oftentimes have Monday night, family night, where you get 2 for 1. The people come in. So I'm on the air all weekend plugging that thing because Kansas City and we were very close to being the champions. So I started announcing on Friday night. Now, Monday night, we're going to be home. It's going to be Monday night, family night. And I said, we're playing the Kansas City Royals. And I said, and I used to take that, talk about dingers. I used to take a bell, which fans sent me all kinds of bells.
Yeah.
And I took it with us on the road.
Mm-hmm.
So if we ever hit a home run, I'd ring that bell in the booth. It alienated the other broadcasters. But at any rate, I said, now, how about this? What if all of you people bring a dinger to the ball game on Monday night and let's bring those Kansas City Royals out of town? Gosh, we ended up with like almost 50,000 people in that stadium that night. And I'll bet conservatively 25,000 of them had bells of all sizes.
Oh.
Jack McKeon, when he later became the manager of the A's, he was manager of the Royals that night.
Yeah.
And he saw me. He said, every time I see you, I think of those damn bells.
Because he lost the doubleheader, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
You know, you talk about Jack, and he was such a wonderful man.
Oh.
Jack was managing a major league team, Monty, when he was 80 years old, and that's the second oldest manager. The oldest, Connie Mack. Connie Mack was 87 when he was still managing, and he managed an A's team, but that was the one in Philadelphia, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's
Wore
good.
that hat all the time, according to the pictures.
Well, now you came up with Dinger, but you had a lot of phrases announcing baseball, didn't you? What were some of the others? How about There She Goes?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was on home runs, I would pick up the ball about almost to the wall, and I would describe it up to that point. I'd say, and there she goes. And I just went into the bleachers.
Yeah.
So,
Of course, you had some great home run hitters on that Oakland team, Mark McGuire and Jose Canseco. And I think that you came up with the swinging A's, didn't you?
yeah, I did. I started that in Kansas City. Oddly enough, in the days we were in Kansas City, when you talk about swingers, you were talking about wedding people, married people, swinging, with other people. So but I wasn't aware of that. So I started calling the swingers because we had two guys, Mike Hirschberger and Danny Cater. They would swing at anything. I mean, they would swing it, ball over their head in the dirt. They just weren't going to walk. So I started calling them the swingers. I said, here comes a swinger, Mike Hirschberger. Here comes Danny Cater. He'll be swinging. I tell you that, he won't take a walk. So we got out into Oakland, and the swingers thing had sort of caught in there in Kansas City. And Charlie called Carl Finley, Carolyn Coffin, and me together. We were the only ones representing the A's in Oakland when we went out there the first month.
Mm-hmm.
And we were there for the winter, and then we had 7 players doing speeches and stuff like that. But we were trying to design the logo for the A's out there. And during the meeting, I said, well, the swingers is pretty much known in Kansas City. Why don't we bring that out here? And Charlie said, hey, that's a good idea. Let's put that on the logo. So they put the swinging A's up there. So it carried on, and they're still using that to this time.
Yeah. Now, Charlie also went to white shoes for his players, didn't he?
Yeah, and that was a good story. We opened the season against the Cleveland Indians, who were managed by Joe Adcock.
Mm.
And after the first pitch that our pitcher made to start the season, when our players were wearing the white shoes, he filed a protest after the first pitch. Walked to the home plate, told the umpire, this game is being played under protest. And the umpire said, why? He said, our players can't see the white ball with those white shoes, those pitchers. So he filed an official complaint on the first pitch ever made with those white shoes.
And that gave you a phrase, didn't it, about good guys?
Yeah, well, I started that in Oakland a little bit. But the thing is,
The good guys in the white shoes.
yeah, good guys in the white shoes. I called it that. I started that. But I'll tell you more about those white shoes. When Charlie came up to tell us about those white shoes, he said, now you talk about that. You describe those white shoes. And he said, now you tell them where I got that white leather. He said, I have worked a deal with this guy in Switzerland, and he owns a farm of albino kangaroos. And he said, you tell them those shoes are albino leather out of albino kangaroos.
Oh, wow. Now, but if you had a player who was really on a streak, you came up with another phrase, didn't you? Let's say a guy had a 12-game hitting streak, or he'd retired 23 men in a row or something. Hotter than a $2 pistol.
Oh, yeah, hotter than a $2 pistol. Yeah. Yeah, I did that with a player who got hot, with the bat and so forth. He started coming up. I said, they'll have a hard time with him, man. He's harder than a $2 pistol.
Didn't you give nicknames to some of the players too?
Yeah. Campaneris, I call Campy, of course. When we were in Arizona spring training before we came to Oakland, you see a lot of road runners out in Arizona. You know, you've been out there, sure. And so Campy was so fast, you know, and they during the season, early in the season, after we got out of spring training, Campy bunted the ball down the third base line and started running to first base. Their third baseman came in, picked up the ball, and threw it to first. Well, he threw it badly, and it went down the right field line, and Campy just kept going. And he kept going around, and the guy in right field picked it up and threw it towards third base, and it went over the third baseman's head, and Campy just kept running. I said, oh, my goodness, the road runner is loose. Beep, beep, Campy's on the run. And Campaneris bunted the ball and scored on it.
Yeah. Now, how about Reggie Jackson? What'd you call him?
Tater Man.
Tater Man.
Yeah, Reggie was the one I heard say, I hit another tater today. He was calling taters.
Sal Bando, who I think, wasn't he the leader of the team, kind of?
Captain, he was an incredible leader on the ball.
Was he? And what you call him?
Captain Sal.
Captain Sal, right?
Yeah, when Alvin Dark came there to manage the A's, he managed them in Kansas City, but Charlie hired him back in Oakland, and he came there after Dick Williams had led the team to a world championship.
Mm-hmm.
And in spring training, Sal Bando, and this was what some of the players told me. Of course, I wasn't on the field to hear it, but I heard it. The first meeting that the team had with Alvin Dark, Bando let it be known before the team and to Alvin Dark, now, Alvin, you're not here to mess up what we've learned from Dick Williams.
Wow. Wow.
So, I mean, that was the kind of captain he was.
What about Raleigh Fingers? Did you have a saying for him?
No, I don't.
I got down here that you said that it's Hold'em Raleigh Fingers time.
Oh, yeah, I did that all the time. Yeah, when Raleigh would come out of the bullpen, I said that a lot. It's Hold'em Raleigh Fingers time, because he did hold them a lot.
I was looking over the past newspaper articles, Monty, and I thought this one was a good one. One person wrote, Monte Moore is completely knowledgeable to what he's doing. He knows his subject. He speaks clearly. He has a good sense of humor and projects an image of a good, sound, down-to-earth person whom someone you'd like to know personally. Above all, though, is his professional ability as a sports announcer. I thought that was a wonderful tribute to you.
Yeah, it makes you feel good, Ross, to ever be known for something other than what you did for a living. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When I came to Porterville, I made up my mind I wanted to do something for the schools and for the city recreation departments. And that's when we created what you came down and played and helped us raise money. We did a golf-orama where we invited 40 big league players to come to Porterville every year. And we did it for 25 years.
Wow.
Every year we had at least 40 players come in. Wow. And we had some of the bigger names. Joe DiMaggio came here. Sandy Koufax. We had a lot of the big.
Wow.
Big, and we raised $850,000 in those 25 years.
Wow. Gave
all the money to the schools.
Do they have a mayor in Porterville?
Do they have?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You should have run for mayor. You would have won in a landslide in Porterville.
I would have. I enjoyed what I did a lot more than the mayor enjoyed his job.
How many accolades, and I want you to be honest about this, How many honors and accolades and certificates have you gotten from the city of Porterville and all the agencies in the town?
Well, you know what, Ross? It's not something I would keep account of, but just recently, a newspaper guy wanted to do a story about things that we had done here, and there were 27 on my wall. There were 27 plaques, pictures, certificates, things like that, all coming from different places, but mainly I wanted to raise money for the kids for the athletic programs.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first week I came to town, I was a big wrestling fan coming from Oklahoma University.
You bet.
When I I didn't know what wrestling was.
Yeah.
You know, I got invited to go to a wrestling match one night by Billy Borders, who was an Olympian, and my roommate right across the hall at Worcester House. But he said, "Hey, you're coming to the meet tonight? We're wrestling." I said, "Yeah." So I went there. I wondered, where were the ropes? I didn't know anything about wrestling at all.
OU and Oklahoma State, they dominated college wrestling until Iowa State came along, I think.
Yeah, the Bedlam series, man, that's where the Bedlam started, not football. They still call it the Bedlam series, but it started with wrestling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to go back to some time. You were the voice of the A's, I guess, for 15 years. After the 76 season, you went on a cruise to Mexico with, I think, about 10 of the A's players.
Yeah.
All right. You come back from the cruise in Mexico with 10 of the A's players, and what'd you find in your mail?
Well, it wasn't in my mail. Actually, my wife and I were out by our pool there in Lafayette. I still had a few days left my winter vacation. And I got a call from the accountant at the Oakland A's office. And he said, I got a notice from the hospital. I'd had surgery on my back when I got back, and a few days later. And he said, "We don't pay, your insurance won't cover that anymore." I said, "Well, why?" He said, "Well, Finley told us to take you off the payroll and off the insurance." I said, "Well, I haven't heard anything about that."
Huh.
So, at any rate, the word got out that Finley had let me go and that I was in the hospital with back surgery, and now my insurance wouldn't even cover that. So it caused a stir in the papers and everything, and I mean, Finley got roasted. So I'm in recovery following surgery one day. My wife was sitting right by the bed, and the phone there in that recovery room rang, and my wife picked it up, and she said, "Here's somebody wants to talk to you." And I picked up, it was Finley. And I said, "Well, hello." And I said, "I haven't heard from you. What's the story?" He said, "Oh, that was a false story." He said, I didn't fire you or anything like that. He said, "A matter of fact, I'm going to give you a raise. And, and I'll take care of this doctor's thing. Don't worry about that. That's covered." He said, "They just made a mistake in the office." Lied like a dog, but he had really fired me because he didn't even ask me. They invited me to go to narrate the films for the people who had paid to be on the cruise. You've seen those cruises.
Yeah.
They wanted to invite some of the players to be the speakers after the film was shown.
Yeah. But didn't he say to you, did you have a good time on the cruise with those players? And
and my kids, yeah, all the kids and players went and everything. I came back, and lo and behold, that was a strange thing.
In 1977, a newspaper in the Bay Area conducted a poll about the sportscasters up there, and you were rated the most popular of all. That's quite an achievement. But you were ready for a change, you said, and why? Well,
Ross, I'd been traveling a lot. I've been doing a lot of years, like I said, 3,000 in a row games, and I just decided to do what Kurt Gowdy one night when we went to Boston to play a game, the Saturday game. After the game was over, he said, "Hey, I'll take you to dinner tonight. You got any plans?" I said, "No." I said, "Man, that'd be wonderful." Because, you may remember Kurt Gowdy did Oklahoma University games.
KOMA, Oklahoma City.
Right, that's right.
1520 on your dial.
That's right. And I remember as a student broadcaster on one side of the basketball games, and I look across and see Kurt Gowdy doing the game on occasion. So at any rate, so I'd known of him. So he invited me, and he said, during the dinner, he said, "What do you plan on doing when you retire?" And I said, "Well, I hadn't thought much about retiring, to tell you the truth. Let me tell you," he said, "a good way to make money. You can think about this." He said, "I bought a radio station in Cheyenne, Wyoming." And he said, "It's really done well." He said, "I don't go out there to run it, but I'm aware of it." And he said, "And I'm buying another one in Boston and another one in Florida." He said, "Those are money-making machines, and you think about that." So I just, so when I'd go into places like Kansas City, I'd take a trip, but I'd rent a car and go down to Moberly, Missouri. They had a little radio station down there, and they broadcast everything in town, sports. And I talked to that manager, and he told me about how much money they made doing sports and stuff like that. So I said, that'd be a good idea for me. So I'm gonna start looking. So then when I would go into towns, I'd go out looking at radio station, interviewing managers. And one time we had a traveling secretary named Jimmy Bank. You may remember Jimmy. I don't know if you do or not, but he later became traveling secretary for Chicago and also for Milwaukee. But his dad owned a radio station in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And his dad had been on the McCann Death March and got out of it. But he bought that radio station, his dad did. And he was a senator in Alabama at the time. But Jimmy told me one day, my dad's getting ready to sell that radio station. He said, "I know you've been looking at stations." He said, "Why don't you take a look?" Well, we had an exhibition game scheduled at our farm team in Alabama. Birmingham. We had a class 18 there, double 18. So we went there, and I knew that was close to Tuscaloosa, so I invited my wife to go on that road trip with us. So when we got in there in the morning, early, we got up early and drove to Tuscaloosa and looked at that radio station that Jimmy Bank told me about. I met his dad and met Charlie Finley's good friend. I didn't know it at the time, Bear Bryant.
Yeah. So
at any rate, we decided that, I like the looks of the station, and being in Alabama, that would be a good one. So I made a bid to buy that radio station. I was going to meet in Chicago in about 3 weeks and sign all the papers. I got a call one day from Mr. Bank. He said, Lonnie, I put that station on the air when I got back from the war. And he said, even though I'm not running it now, I have a feeling for it. So if it's okay with you, can we cancel that purchase? Luckily, I hadn't told Finley that I was leaving.
Yeah.
So at any rate, I got out of that station. And then when we got back to Oakland, when I finally made up my mind I was going to try to free the station, a friend of mine owned a station in Monterey, and he came to visit me in the hospital when I was up there for another reason. And he said, you ever heard of Porterville? I said, no. He said, they've got a couple of little stations down there, AM and FM, and they're one in the same building, the same station owner. And that station is in trouble financially, and the owner is getting ready to sell it. I said, well, why are they in trouble? He said, because the owner got on the air and editorialized in favor of Cesar Chavez,
Ooh.
who was unionizing all the cotton pickers and all those people around, And he said people are boycotting any business that is advertising on that radio station.
Wow.
Because he favored Chavez.
Yeah.
He said, you ought to go down and take a look at that. Well, when I got out of the hospital, I was doing the basketball game of the week for Eddie Einhorn on TBS.
Yeah.
TBS. and I had a game scheduled with UCLA down in LA. So I got my wife and I said, we're going to drive through Porterville on the way to LA. We'll go. So we took a look at town, looked at the radio station, and I said, man, we couldn't make a living in this town. There's 17,000 people. So anyway, we decided to forget that. We got back up there and I started thinking about it and talking to them a little. And first thing you know, I made an offer for it and they accepted the offer.
Wow.
I hadn't told Finley yet that I was leaving, and it was about 3 weeks before spring training. So I told him, and he cussed me out for 5 minutes. He said, I know where you're going. I know where you're going. That you're going to go to work with the Giants. He said, they already talked to me about you. And I said, Charlie, I haven't heard anything from the Giants. I'm not going. I'm going to buy a radio station. Oh, hell, you couldn't afford to buy a radio station. I said, I'm working it out, Charlie. And I said, that's it. You know, we're enjoying working for you, but I'm through.
Yeah.
I went to Porterville.
Yeah, but I think you also told me one time that it dawned upon you that, wait a minute, my kids are getting to the age where they're going to be competing in high school sports, and you wanted to watch them.
Yep. I wanted to see my kids. My wife and I talked about it, and we talked with Bruce Drake, our in-laws, and, you know, we all decided it was a good thing to try to do that. And so, Ross, I had been in Porterville about 10 days maybe, and I'm over to the house I'm in right now. It's the house we had agreed to buy, but it needed some work. So I was here working with my kids, and family was still up there. They hadn't gotten out of school yet. Spring training was going to start in about a few days. I got a call from the Texas Rangers. Their good friend, Dick Reisenhoover, had passed away. And they were just, a few days away from spring training. And they offered me the job to come do the Texas Rangers games. And I said, no, I'm through with it. But let me tell you something. I know a guy that would be good for you to talk to. And I said, I know it's close, spring training and everything, but I said, the guy named John Miller, Finley fired him. And he's down here doing soccer now in San Jose, but he's a real good baseball guy. And they said, well, we don't have any of his tapes or anything, and our spring training games start like next weekend. I said, why don't you just fly him down there on my advice that he's good? You take my word for it. Let him do a spring training game, and you guys in Texas listen to him and make up your mind.
Yeah.
They did that. They flew him to spring training. He did a spring training game, and at the end of the day, they called him up and hired him.
I think he was 21 years old, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was just a kid. Yeah. And I had hired him out of a stack of tapes, when a job is open, and it seemed like every year or two, my partner's job was open.
Yeah.
So, but all these tapes came, and I'm listening to these things at home at night. Man, that guy sounds pretty good. And I got his phone number, called him. I said, hey, could you meet me at the Coliseum tomorrow? We'll talk about my job. Because Finley had told me to find somebody. So he showed up, and here's this young kid walking in.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, can I help you? And he said, yeah, you invited me to come here and talk about the job. I said, oh, that tape? He said, yeah. I said, how'd you get that tape? It was of the Giants game.
Mm-hmm.
He had sat in the left field bleachers and taped that game at the ballpark.
Wow.
And it was good. So I called Finley. I said, hey, you wait right here a few minutes. I told that kid, wait here. I'm going to go call Charlie, and I'm going to recommend. So I called Charlie. I said, Charlie, I want you to listen to this tape. I said, I think we found our guy. So I turned that little bitty tape machine on, played about 3 or 4 minutes, and Finley cut in, and he said, I said, Charlie, it'd be a good number 2 guy, wouldn't he? He said, number 2, hell, he'd be good enough to be number 1. So I went back and hired John Miller.
Wow.
Right there.
When you were getting ready to finally buy a station, you said that, it occurred to you that you didn't want a big city station. There's too much pressure on ratings. You liked the idea of what a small station could do for a small town. And that's why you made the move that you did. And I think you've been very, very happy. And I'm very happy because even though Porterville was not named for any member of my family.
I thought we hired somebody from your family to work at that radio station.
You were kind enough to hire our son, who now he became a clinical psychologist. He's a doctor. He has written 8 books. He's running a nonprofit that helps special needs people. I'm very, very proud of him. But he used to tell me that the KTIP had I think it was a station wagon, and you had him drive around Porterville with a giant microphone on the top of the station wagon. Is that right?
Very possible. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. One time, I think you did a local high school baseball game on KTIP, and the next day you did a nationally televised game.
Well, yeah, I did that a couple of times. When Wes Parker was working with me on Saturday game of the week, we were the backup game. Our little high schools, or 2 high schools, Porterville and Wenatchee, were playing a baseball game, and on the Porterville field, no press box, no nothing like that. And I said, I've got to broadcast that ball game. I had a young broadcaster named John Quinlan on the station at the time, but I said, I'm going to do that game. So I lined it up and I called Wes. I said, Wes, how about coming down here on Friday morning and doing a high school game with me? And then we'll get a private plane out of here after the game and go to LA, we'll stay all night with you, and then we'll fly to New York for the meeting. Well, we did that. And that station, Wes Parker and I did a high school game on Friday. And then flew to New York. I got there in time for the production meeting. But we did a lot of every sport, Ross, we broadcast. We broadcast swimming, we broadcast water polo.
Yeah.
What else could a little station do?
Yeah.
And we sold all that. No, we were sold out.
Monty, you went back to the A's broadcast booth in 1987, kind of on an occasional basis. But then after that, you became the full-time television broadcaster. And what did you do? 50 or 60 A's telecast each year for the stations?
Yeah, I did 62 games. The first year we did 25 games. Ross, that's what I signed up for. 25 games. Well, then before spring training was over, they called up and said, we've got another station in San Jose wants to do enough where we could do 62 games total. Could you do 62 games? And I said, oh my goodness, I'll be gone a lot. I was tired of traveling, but I said, I'll tell you what, I'll do it if you let my son, who is going to be a freshman in college, work on our production crew and travel with us. Mm-hmm. No deal, no big deal. We'll do that. So my son, Donnie, traveled with me all summer. We had a wonderful time. The players were great to him. Mark McGuire was his good buddy. And Wilt Weiss still sends him uniforms and everything. He got to know the guys knew him, but he didn't want to go into broadcasting. He went into parks and recreation development. But at any rate, yeah, when I went back up there, you said I did a few games. Lon Simmons and Bill King were both doing football games. Simmons was doing the 49ers, and Bill King was doing the Raiders games. Yeah. They conflicted towards the end of the year, and when both of them had a game, they had to have somebody.
Yeah.
So they invited me to come up and do radio. Yeah. And so I did that. Well, one time they were both gone. One of them was doing radio, and their games were the same. So Channel 5 had the television rights, and they called me up and said, Monty, would you be willing to do a simulcast? I said, a simulcast? I've never done one of them. Yeah, sure, why not? I'll be accurate. So they hired me to do a simulcast. And at that time, I was only doing radio substitute when one of Bill or Ron or Lon were gone.
For anybody who doesn't know, that's doing radio and television both at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a challenge, not to overtalk or anything. I said, well, sure, I'll do it. So I did that game as a substitute for the radio guys. I wasn't doing TV at that time. Well, on Christmas Eve, I got a call from KPIX TV in San Francisco. They said, Monty, we got the broadcast rights for television for 30 games. Would you be interested in coming up here and doing our 30 games and just doing that meeting? I said, well, yeah, I'll work it out. So I decided to go back, and that was on TV. So I agreed to do that. And like I said before the season started, they had added another station. So instead of 30 games, I did 62.
Yeah. And there came a time, I think it was probably after the 92 season, and this happens a lot to announcers, you have rights to broadcasts switch hands. One station will win it away from the other station. And when that happens, usually, not usually, but a lot of the times, there's a change of announcers. And I think that happened to you. They went with Dick Stockton, and Dick Stockton made a comment one time. He said, Monte Moore was as fine a baseball broadcaster as you could find in the country. He was a high echelon guy. Another tribute to you. And you are such a fine man that you didn't have any hard feelings about that, did you?
Oh, no, I've done enough, Ross. I was disappointed when I heard that they were going to make a change, but it was anticipated. And I really, frankly, I was happy. I was really tired, even doing 60 games. You travel probably close to 80 days to do 60 games. And I was ready to hang it up.
Yeah. Well, you finally sold KTIP in 1996, but you stayed on and kind of worked as a consultant at one time too, didn't you?
Yeah, I did that just as a free, to keep your hand in it, sort of, and the new guys who bought it, I could tell right away they didn't know a whole lot about broadcasting. They were music people, and they changed the music on the FM station. They went to playing jazz music in Porterville. Give me a break. So anyway, I just went back to, when they wanted some advice on something, I'd go back.
Yeah, but in 2002, you began teaching a class on sportscasting over at Porterville College. And that had to be a lot of fun for you, too.
Well, yeah, you know what? The way I ended up at Porterville College is I was all retired and everything. And the PR director at Porterville College moved out of town and took a job somewhere in Colorado or somewhere. And the president of the college called me up and said, hey, could you help us out here? Our PR guy is gone. And you have dealt with the PR people from the radio station. What would you think about coming out and helping us out for a while? I said, well, okay, I don't have anything going right now. I'll do it. So I said, let me set my own hours. So I'd go out there at 8 in the morning, come home at noon, play golf in the afternoon. But I actually went there as a PR director. And when one day we were sitting there talking to the president, and she said, would you be interested in teaching a speech class out here? And I said, well, no, not really. I don't want to have to prepare and all that kind of stuff. I said, now, I'll tell you what, if you have some kids that want to become sportscasters, I'll be glad to work with them and no charge. I'll work with them.
Wow.
She said, tell you what, we'll make a class out of it.
Huh.
We ended up with about 7 kids wanting to be sportscasters.
Wow.
I taught a sportscasting class out there for 2 semesters.
Did any of them turn out to be good?
How about Pete Arbogast?
Our friend Pete Arbogast, the voice of the USC Trojans.
Yep. he worked at KTIP,
Yeah.
also. And
You helped Gary Bender too, didn't you?
Gary Bender was, he was in KU. He was at Kansas.
Right.
I didn't have a lot to do with him. He moved in there after I had gone.
Yeah. Well, John Miller said, when we were talking about the fact that he was hired and he's 21 and you convinced Charlie Finley to hire him, he said, Monte realized I was nervous. He sensed that. And he went out of his way to help me. He's a very sensitive person, and I appreciate what he did. I will never forget it. And those are the words now of one of the top sportscasters in America, John Miller. So another tribute to you, Monte.
What about him, Ross? Tell you about him. I always kid him. Say, I gave you your first job with the Oakland A's. I got you your job with the Texas Rangers. and when you left the Texas Rangers, Haywood Sullivan, general manager of the Red Sox, called me one day and said, "What can you tell me about this guy Miller?" So you never did even know it, John, but I talked to Haywood Sullivan about your Boston job.
Oh, wow. And I think another thing, and you and I talk about this a lot, is the fact that you are very appreciative of the fact that the A's invite you to come back to Oakland for the special occasions. I mean, when you honor the past guys, the jersey retirements. I think you've even thrown out some ceremonial first pitches. You sign autographs, a lot of anniversary events, and you MC so many of them. That's nice to have those people appreciate you so much. And I know you've had, I think it's 4 different anniversaries of those World Series winning teams. They had, 72, 73, 74, and 89.
Yeah. I was involved in 6 World Series, Ross.
Yep.
As a broadcaster, so we have 6 World Series rings. 4 of them were world champions, but losers also get a World Series ring.
Yeah, that's right. But they're nice to you, and that's a very nice accomplishment for you that they take enough of you that they bring you back.
Yeah, well, one thing, Ross, and this hasn't even been made public, so but it's okay because they notified me this past year that the opening game of the opening series, if we'd had a regular season, the A's were going to play the Yankees a home game.
Mm-hmm.
And the A's had told me they were going to have that day before the game, I would throw out the first pitch, but they were going to present me with a trophy, and it's going to be called the Monte Moore Broadcasting Award Trophy.
Oh, wow.
And it's going to be perpetually given to an outstanding broadcaster from the Bay Area from here on.
Oh, wonderful. What a legacy that would be.
But we never got to do it because...
No, that's right. But I know that when you retired, you got to spend more time with your family. That was very important to you. Your church has been very important to you. In fact, one of the things I admire about you most, Monte, is the fact that I think your Christian faith has really guided your life.
Well, there's no doubt about that. I read a lot of the Bible on airplanes traveling around with big league ball clubs. I can tell you that. And eventually, I ended up serving as an elder of our church here for quite a few years. And that my Christian life has meant a lot to me.
Do you remember a radio and television personality named Ralph Edwards?
Oh yeah, he did. Truth or Consequences or something?
That, and he created and he hosted a show called This Is Your Life. And today, this is your life, Monte Moore.
Ross, you're too kind.
You look so good at 90 years old. Boy,
Yeah.
I'm so happy to be with you. And thank you for taking the time today to share so much of your wonderful life.
Well, I appreciate it, Ross. I can't imagine anybody wanting to hear all this, but if they do, let them do it in pieces.
It's been enjoyable.
But it's great to be on with another Sooner,
Well, that's right. And you and I have talked about it. Who would have believed the two guys who were in the Class D Sooner State League together wound up as Major League announcers?
Yeah. And in that same Sooner State, not in the Sooner State League, but the 3I League, Bill King was in Lincoln, Nebraska, doing games that I did for Topeka in the minor leagues. And who else was in? Chick Hearn.
Yeah.
Was in Peoria, Illinois,
Right.
doing games. So a lot of these guys in the big leagues have never been in the minors like you and I did.
Yeah, that's right. Monty, thank you again, my friend.
All right, and say so long to your wife.
Thank you, Monty. Thank you very much.
It was a warm summer night.